There we go. Um, and I wanted to mention Greenwich Library's program series, Summit Series, intends to bring exceptional writers to the Greenwich Library and complement some of our ongoing writing programs. The New York Times bestselling author Hallie Ephron is an Edgar Award finalist and five-time finalist for the Mary Higgins Clark Award. She writes books she hopes readers can't put down. Hallie teaches writing at workshops and writing conferences across the country and abroad. As an award-winning crime fiction book reviewer, Hallie wrote an on-crime column for the Boston Globe for more than 10 years. So without any further delay, I'm excited to extend a warm welcome to Hallie Ephron. Hallie, I'm going to mute myself and go into the background as I turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rick. And I want to thank the Greenwich Library, the Writing Summit series, and all of you out there for dialing in on this windy, rainy night. My house moans in this weather. I don't know where exactly it comes from down the chimney, but if you hear in the background, woo, it's I wish I could duplicate it for Halloween, but that's what my house does. Hopefully we won't lose power. That's what we have our fingers crossed for. Okay, I am going to talk tonight about the writing life, and about some of the things I've learned about writing fiction in particular. And I dare say that a few of you out there must be like me. If you come to writing after another career, after family, after just other things in your life. And I actually think it's a good thing because it gives you something to write about, all that experience that you have. It's grist for the writing mill. I'm never surprised that young people write fantasy because they just don't have all that much experience stored up, so they have to make things up. So writing after other things is a good thing. It's when you have time for it. It's also hopefully when you have the money to give yourself a little bit of a pushback from having to work every hour. So maybe like me, you started to try your handwriting with memoir. What I did when I started was essays. I wrote short essays about, oh gosh, things like my mother's alcoholism, my husband's collecting of all kinds of things, my feeling of having to compete with my relatives, and just all kinds of my children's soccer, playing soccer with the boys, all kinds of short pieces. And I took classes. And I thought, as I was reading them, well, these are pretty good, never mind that they're a page and a half, but they're pretty good. And I thought, well, what if I just string them together? Would I have a book? And the answer is no, there is not a book. Because what I learned from that failure is that a good story has a shape that real life often lacks. In fact, almost always lacks. You have to add it if you're going to write it. That books come out in 3 acts, real life doesn't. And that in a novel there has to be something important at stake for a main character. Something important at stake for a main character. And my essays were fun, but they were just episodic. They weren't really going anywhere. In other words, I wasn't giving the reader a reason to keep reading. Now I find that many authors who are hoping to get published hit the same snag. I can't tell you how many times I have talked with aspiring writers who are writing their first novel, and they get about 100 pages into it and they stop, and they realize that they don't have a character arc. And they didn't even know they needed one up to that point. So it's a pretty common problem. And it's something you kind of have to discover, that character arcs are essential for book-length fiction. Um, think about Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. Dorothy wants to run away from home. She gets carried away in the cyclone and has adventures away from home, only to discover that there's no place like home, right? So there's a character arc. She's going somewhere. Would not be nearly as powerful a book if she just flew off to Oz, had adventures, and stayed there, unless she had some other kind of issues going on. Uh, but So I may not have had a character arc, but I did have something that I'll bet a lot of you have, which is dogged determination to get better. And I was very lucky. I have good genes, and I'll talk about them in a minute. That I did nothing to earn, I just got them. Um, it also helped that my kids were finishing college, which means the playroom that was their place to play in the house was available to me as an office. Very important to have a place to write. And I had a husband who was still drawing a paycheck, which is no small thing. I mean, I think writing takes a while to get good at, and you're so fortunate if you have an income or savings or something to fall back on, which is why I usually tell aspiring writers, don't quit your day job. You know, if you can go to part time, great. But if you, it's just it's too scary, and it's too hard, and it takes too long. Um, so still, even with my good genes, it took me 10 years from the time I started deciding I wanted to write and starting that first novel to get my book represented by a good literary agent, and still longer to find a publisher. I was once very happy to hear Dennis Lehane talking, because he does a lot of teaching as well as writing. Great writer. He said his experience is 10 years minimum from the time that somebody starts thinking they want to write to getting um, getting on the agent editor track. And I'm not surprised by that. It just did my heart good to hear him say that, because that was certainly my experience. Today, I'm going to share with you what I've learned about the writing life, some dirty little secrets, as well as epiphanies about craft and courage. So I'll start by saying I grew up in a family of writers. That was a wonderful thing. My parents were screenwriters, Henry and Phoebe Ephron. They wrote wonderful movies like Carousel, Daddy Longlegs, and The Desk Set. And I had a very easy upbringing in Beverly Hills. My parents worked at the studio. There were books everywhere in the house. Um, it was just, there was poetry at the dinner table. My mother had been she went to Hunter because her parents decided to spend what little money they had on sending her brother to an Ivy League school, but not her, as bright as she was. So she was at Hunter. She was an English major, and she loved poetry. And so at the dinner table, often after dessert, she would recite just, fairly ridiculous poems in retrospect, like the Congo, boom lay, boom lay, boom lay, boom, and Edna St. Vincent Millay's suicidal poetry, and Edward Arlington Robinson's wonderful little stories about miscreants. And I developed a real sense of pleasure in the spoken word, in the written word, just in words in general. And she was also a stickler. Like if you said to my mother, "Can I go out and play?" she would say, "You can, but you may not." And so I got this kind of, grammar uh, Nazi in my head, that is not a bad thing to have when you're a writer, is so that when you make a mistake, you know it and you're doing it deliberately. Because a lot of characters talk like that. They say, "Can I go out?" They don't say, "May I go out?" Nobody says that. So even though you know it's wrong, you can write it if you know you're writing dialogue. Um, So I grew up in a family of writers, books everywhere, poetry at the dinner table. There was competition just to make your voice heard. We all wanted to make my father laugh. That was the big deal. And you'd think that growing up in that environment would have given me a leg up on being a writer. My sisters hit the ground running. Nora, 3 years out of college, was a journalist. She went on from the New York Post to work for Esquire and Playboy. 30 years later, she was writing and directing movies. You've Got Mail, Sleepless in Seattle, Julie and Julia. She she was a supernova. She was just so talented. My sister Delia, who's the next in line, uh, started to write 6 years out of college. She's now a novelist, a screenwriter. She writes poignant humor. And her most recent suspense is a New York Times bestseller called Syracuse. And she has a book coming out next year uh, called, I think it's Go Left on 10th. Um, and it's a memoir and it's wonderful. I'm in the middle of reading it right now. So it's Nora, then Delia 4 years later, then me 3 years later, and then my sister Amy 5 years later. So it's quite a distance among us. And Amy, my little sister, published her first novel in her 20s. Damn her. And she writes essays, historical romance. Now she writes middle grade fantasy, Castle in the Mist, Carnival Magic. She's a very talented writer. And I was the one who people would say, "What's the matter with you? Why don't you write?" Well, I just didn't. I was the family rebel. In that family, that meant I wanted to be a teacher. Okay, my mother horrified the whole idea that one of her daughters would be a teacher. You know, it was as bad as a stewardess or a nurse. Zutalor, terrible, terrible. So she made me promise. My mother was pretty smart. She made me promise that if I became a teacher, at least I wouldn't take any education courses in college. I would take them all in graduate school, which was very good advice in retrospect because um, undergraduate elementary education courses are just not, I mean, college is a good time to experiment, to learn some political science, some art history. You're never going to have an opportunity like that again. And I think she was quite right about that. So that's what I did. I went to Barnard College. I got my bachelor's degree in African politics, if you can believe that. And then I got my teaching degree and taught in the New York City public schools. Loved teaching elementary school. I taught as PS 189 in Washington Heights. And then I got married, moved to Milton, which is where I live now, and did a little bit of teaching here. Got my PhD in education, taught at the college level, worked in high tech. I had a lot of things going on, had my babies. And it wasn't until I was in my 40s that I got a call from a freelance writer who asked me, she said, "I'd like to write a freelance piece about you." I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, you're the only one in your family that doesn't write." And I said, "If anyone's going to write about me not writing, it's going to be me." And I was 40. I mean, I needed to get going. So I did. I started taking classes. I think I just had to get old enough to stop caring about whether I would be compared to them. And also had enough confidence in my own ability. And it helped that my husband was a college professor and was drawing down a paycheck so I could drop to part time and still have time to do the mommying that I needed to do and working and writing. So at any rate, I realized that failure wasn't going to kill me. Rejection or negative reviews would be painful, but not the end of the world. And if people were going to compare me to my sisters, that was their business. You know, I just needed to get that maturity. I also needed to get to where I had something to say, but I didn't realize that I did. Um, as I said earlier, I started, as most of us do, with essays about growing up in Beverly Hills, about surviving talented but alcoholic parents. I thought I was writing a book, lovely paragraphs, the occasional compelling page. But the manuscript, as a manuscript, just circled the drain. It didn't go anywhere. Um, and the thing is, I had read so many books, I was sure I knew how to write one. The truth was, I didn't know what I didn't know. Um, and that's where, this dramatic arc thing comes in. It took me a while and taking classes and having my work read by other people and being open to criticism, that I finally got it. What did it take to write a 300-page manuscript? Um, it took me about 10 years to learn, to get it good enough to start shopping it with agents. And like many of you, I have at least one Training Wheels book in the drawer. And it's the steepest learning curve I've ever experienced. And a complete surprise to me, because as I say, I read a lot. I figured, why is, this can't be that hard. But it really is. So for those of you out there who are experiencing the steep learning curve, I'm right there with you. The problem for me when I did start to write was that I was convinced that my personal experience, I'd been a mother, a sister, a daughter, a teacher, I'd worked in high tech. I thought all of those were essentially boring and didn't equip me to write. I mean, I hadn't been to war. I hadn't been disfigured by fire. I hadn't been abused. I had no trauma in my life. And I felt like I don't have anything to say, was not true, but it is what I thought. And it is what started me down the path for my first novels of collaborating with someone who had a much more interesting life than I did. So I have a friend, his name is Don Davidoff. He's a forensic neuropsychologist. He runs a unit at Harvard's McLean Hospital. And on the side, he's an expert witness who evaluates people accused of murder and then testifies in court. What a fascinating background he had. All these fascinating cases he'd worked on. And he loved mystery novels, loved reading them. He would pop them like chiclets, just read 3 or 4 in a weekend. And that's what I wanted to write, was a mystery novel, because I love mystery novels. So we got together and we started writing. Now, I lucked out because Don was afraid I was going to make him write. He's not a writer. I was afraid he was going to want to write. So it was a perfect partnership. We collaborated on story, on the meat and potatoes, what happened and how would these characters behave in the hospital and how would they behave in the courthouse and how do you get into the prison? How many gates do you have to go through and what do you have to, what's it like, dealing with the guards, and just, he knew all of that stuff. And as I say, he didn't want to write it. He was great at reading what I wrote, at collaborating with me on making it better. So we wrote a first book in what became the Dr. Peter Zak mystery series. And on the strength of that, we got an agent. And after many, many, many revisions, I must say, in fact, when I sent that book out to be, it was how many years ago? It was around the year 2000. Oh my goodness, how could that be? 20 plus years ago. Oy. That's when the book came out. So I would have been shopping it in like 2018. And in those days, yes, there was email, barely. And there were phones but most of what you did when you looked for an agent is you created what they call a query package, which was an outline of the book and a cover letter and maybe the first few pages and a letter. and you would send it out to a raft of literary agents that you would look up and find who they were and what kind of queries they took and who their clients were. And so I wrote a letter that said that I had written this book and my sister Nora Ephron loved it, which was a lie. Okay. It's not the truth. She said she didn't have time to read it. And as long as she didn't have to read it, I could say that. That's my sister Nora. So I was happy to do that. I sent the query. I sent 25 of them out. 25 query packages. You know, I'm spending a lot of time at the Xerox machine. Remember the Xerox machine? And one agent responded positively, and she was wonderful. Louise Quayle was at the Ellen Levine Literary Agency, a very fine literary agency. And after we did some of the revisions that she suggested, she sent it out to editors. And that's when I learned that I had not learned the lesson about character arc, because all of the publishers that I would have wanted to be published with rejected the manuscript. Okay. Didn't care what Nora Ephron said about my manuscript. They didn't want it. So one of them, though, did me the greatest favor by actually writing why. What she said was, when I buy a manuscript like this, because this was for a mystery series, she said, I need to care what happened to the character before the book opens and what's going to happen to the character after the book ends. Now, this may sound familiar. This is what I was talking about in the beginning. That's a character arc. And your book, this editor was saying, doesn't have it. I don't care about your character. So we went back to the drawing board and we thought, he doesn't have enough skin in the game. It's a puzzle book. We've got a great mystery, lots of clues and red herrings and suspects, but there's no there as far as the main character goes. So we did something that a million writers have done. We gave him a dead wife. Now, this is such a cliche in the mystery field, but it's a cliche because it works. We gave him a trauma in the past that he now has to face in the context of dealing with this new case, and he has to get it right this time because he feels a lot of guilt over his wife's murder. His wife was murdered by a client who he represented, and he wasn't able to stop it. So now he has this new opportunity to prevent that from happening again. And at the end of the book, at the beginning of the book, he's very reluctant to take the case. He's not sure he wants to get back into this. He's still grieving for his wife. And at the end of the book, very symbolically, he's able to take off his wedding ring and put it in a drawer. And so I had this new plot. I threaded it through the other book, and voila, the book sold. It was made a big difference. So even though I had learned, I thought, about character arc, I still was not able to apply it until that book. Now, it's the first thing I think about when I write a book is who's the main character, where do they begin, where are they going, and what's the trauma in the past that's motivating them. So we found an agent, we had an editor, and I saved all my rejection letters, and I use them all the time when I'm giving a talk. They're fun to read because much of it is boilerplate, and it always is nice if you get these letters to know that I got these letters too. They were riddled with typos and grammatical errors. And let me see if I have some quotes. They were things like, I'm afraid I don't think I'd be able to sell your book. We simply did not have the requisite enthusiasm, a very recurrent phrase, requisite enthusiasm in your project. Without sufficient enthusiasm, someone else wrote. So these are mostly your manuscript goes in, it lands on the desk of an intern, and unless you have somebody recommend you that the agent knows and or the editor knows, and you just don't you just don't see the light. Your manuscript very likely is just accepted or rejected. Getting actual comments from an agent or editor is golden. It's just a wonderful thing, provided you can listen to it and try to respond. So the editor said yes, and I wish I could read you my acceptance letter. But when the news came, it came by phone. My agent called with the good news. We talked. I screamed. I hung up. I jumped up and down. I called my husband. He said, "So what did she say?" And I said, I couldn't remember a word. I couldn't remember a single word of what she said. So I have to say, when I get down to writing advice, my first piece of writing advice is take notes. Okay. I should have been taking notes when I had that call, because boy, do I wish I could remember what she said. And we wrote 5 mystery novels together. And after that, I started to write my own solo novels. And yeah, by then I realized that my life experience had given me stuff to write about. And in fact, my sweet spot is writing about women like me experiencing an extraordinary bump in an otherwise ordinary life. That's where I like to go. And so I'm always talking about family. I'm talking about what you keep and what you don't keep in your home, about houses and what they mean to people, about property and what it means to people, about familiar relationships, sisters and parents. The idea for my first standalone that I wrote by myself came to me at a yard sale. I mean, not surprisingly, right? I remember I went to a yard sale around the corner. I love yard sales. My husband loved yard sales. We would go to them I miss that a lot, I have to say, in COVID. They're such a mindlessly wonderful way of whiling away a Saturday morning. At any rate, I went to a yard sale around the corner from the house. I walked over there, and it was a house that my daughter had played at for years with the owner's daughter. They moved away. This new family moved in. And there on the driveway were all the things that I recognized from the house, the lighting fixtures, the kitchen cabinets, the just stuff that because I'd been in that house so much. So I'm chatting up the woman, and she's telling me about all the work that they had done to the house. And it's been obvious because there's been a big dumpster out in front. And I talked my way into the house. Finally, she broke down and said, "Why don't you go inside and look around?" So I went in. And it was beautiful. They had Laura Ashley everywhere. It was just a beautiful renovation. They had taken this house that had a living room in the center of the house with no windows. That's so Victorian. There was a fireplace, but no windows, because those houses were built to conserve heat in the winter. So it was a very dark downstairs. Anyway, they had opened all of that up. It was very beautiful. I went upstairs. I saw what they'd done up there. And while I'm walking around, the mystery writer in me kicked in, and I thought, what if, and that's always how a story comes to me, what if woman goes to a yard sale, somehow she talks her way into the house, she goes inside, and she never comes out. And I thought, that's it, my book, my book, my book. She never comes out. Well, what happened to her? Well, I don't know yet. But I ran home as fast as I could, because I freaked myself out too. I needed to get out of the house. It was scary. And I went home. And by the time I got home, I had decided that the woman who was having the yard sale was 9 months pregnant. And the woman who comes to the yard sale and disappears inside it, 9 months pregnant too. So remember what I said about a character arc, and the main character has to have stakes. Well, greater stakes could there be than an unborn child? I mean, that is huge. However, I must say, I really, as a mother of two children, I don't like books where the child becomes the author's pawn, where it becomes this game piece that the author can move around on the board. Not kids. I don't like that. So if you read it, it's called Never Tell a Lie. I hope you'll think that I did justice to that baby, because I really don't like it when even authors put children at risk. Just rubs me wrong. So at any rate, that was the first book, and it was a big hit. It was a bestseller. It it was turned into a movie for the Lifetime Movie Network, and I just, I was so happy that that I was able to do that, and it gave me a way of thinking about books from then on. I didn't feel like I had to have a big story. I could have a small story with big issues like who can you trust. Um, so my new novel, Careful What You Wish For, is inspired by all the stuff my husband has dragged home over the years from yard sales. It's kind of Antiques Roadshow meets Strangers on a Train, and and the source for it. Remember, I said I did a lot of writing of essays way back when. I found one of the things that I always do is I save my rough drafts. I hope you do too. I save almost everything I ever write. Somewhere it's on my computer. Um, and I went back to one of the essays that I had written when I was spinning my wheels and trying to learn how to write. Um, People read Careful What You Wish For. It's about a woman who, a professional organizer married to a man who can't pass a yard sale without stopping. And she's a professional organizer, very Marie Kondo in terms of folding things and organizing. But Marie Kondo did not inspire me to write that. I was writing about that in 1980. So one of the first essays I wrote, I'm just going to read you a little bit of something I wrote that I couldn't publish because it didn't go anywhere. But then I found it 30 years later. It goes like this. This morning, my 90-year-old neighbor was up on a stepladder washing the 8 windows that surround her porch. After that, she vacuumed the sidewalk. This is true. She lived right over there. The cord snaked like an umbilicus up the steps and through the front door. By the street, she set a tidy row of paint cans alongside pieces of lumber and plumbing innards. Beside this, she planted a hand-lettered sign, free. Just watching her inspires me. Suddenly, I'm ready to tackle that walk-in closet that I haven't been able to walk into for months. I know my husband will be inspired as well, inspired to clean the gutters and rake the lawn, so he'll be in position to grab off any of the neat stuff she throws out. So I wrote that so many years ago, and yet there it was, waiting for me to exhume it, as it were, and use those ideas in the new book. So, looking back, I have advice for aspiring writers. Okay. First of all, take notes. Seriously, take notes. If you've seen the documentary that my nephew, Nora Ephron's son, put together about Nora, which is called Everything is Copy. That's something my mother said, and I was there to hear her say it. She was dying in the hospital. She knew she was dying. And she said, "You're a writer, take notes." She's very tough broad. Yeah. And she was right. I mean, even when terrible things happen, when good things happen, Take notes, because like that phone call from the agent that I could not remember a single thing she said. All you remember is the bad stuff. It's the time when someone insults you or is mean to you, and those are the things that get stuck in your brain. And that's not the stuff you necessarily want to write about. It's okay. You might find a home for it. But there's so much more that's going on that I really admire anybody who has the discipline to take notes on a regular basis. Um, really, because 9 times out of 10, the stuff you'll remember is the stuff you wish you could forget. Um, and there's no richer well than your own experience. I had to find that out for myself. And actually, especially the negative experiences, they're very, very juicy for writing fiction. And even if you're writing fiction, if you're doing it right, you're triangulating from real experiences that you've had. In other words, you're not writing a memoir, but you are grabbing onto the emotions, sensations of your real life. It's like method acting in that way, and it's one of the reasons I think if you are a writer and you have an opportunity to take acting lessons, do it, because it will help you think about being in another character's head, someone else's head other than yourself, and how that would feel, and so on. Acting is great training for a writer. Number 2, make space in your life to write. And here I don't mean quit your day job, but do try to cut back so you really have a regular time and an extended time. And for me, it needs to be daily. If I skip a day, it takes me, at least another couple of hours just to catch up on what I. Whereas if I write every day, I just need, like a 10-minute running start, and then I'm back where I was. So try to cut back, carve out a space in your house where nothing else happens but you write. So this is my office, this is my writing space. And I usually have a little yellow sticky on the door over there that says keep out. And I face it in so I can read it. Okay. That's not to keep other people out, that's to keep me in. Okay. And out of the rest of the house. So keep out. Carve out time. I think you should cut back on social networking if you possibly can. I know, publishers have us racing to have some kind of public persona, a blog, followers on Facebook, and that does help sell your book. There's no question that it does if you have a presence, but it also keeps you from writing it. So just, balance there. Take solitaire off your computer. When you're in your office, turn off your phone, turn off your cell, turn off your email. I like to use a timer, like 30 minutes, and I just don't do anything for 30 minutes except write, even if I don't have anything to say. I just try to write for that 30 minutes. And usually by the end, I need another 10 or 15 or 20 minutes to finish whatever it is I'm working on. But if you're more disciplined than I am, then great. I also tend to make a chart with my book. My books are 300 pages, so I can create a calendar from the day I start in 500 word increments. That's how much I can write in a day. That's how much good I can write in a day. I can't do more than that. There's a lot of people who do much more than that. And there's a lot of people who do much less. You have to find your own sweet spot. But for me, 500 words. So that's 500 divided by 30, whatever I said, the the book length is. And then I create a chart and I see how I'm doing. I plot my trajectory against the actual, and it shows me how much faster I need to go, or that I have some time to take a couple of days off, which is very nice. Okay, my third piece of advice: pay attention to those things that affect you deeply, and especially to your fears. So I can count, you know, many times people have said to me, I've got a great idea for your book, for your next book. What they have is a great idea for their next book, not for my next book. Your ideas are your ideas. And the kinds of stories that speak to me are human scale and scary, and suspense is my friend. Um, so it has really helped me because then I end up writing about something I care about. And it's much easier to write about something you care about than something that you don't care about. I always think about writing in a way that makes me feel off balance. So I think there's a movie called Suspicion. It's an Alfred Hitchcock movie. And it's got Cary Grant and Joan Fontaine. I'm sure some of you know that movie. Joan Fontaine is a rich woman, and she has a gigolo. I don't know if he's her boyfriend or her. I think he might be her husband. He's a lot younger. He's handsome. He's Cary Grant. Do I need to say more? And she's afraid he's trying to kill her, and we're afraid he's trying to kill her when we watch this movie. And there's a moment in the movie where Cary Grant climbs the stairs, bringing Joan Fontaine her nightly glass of milk. She does it every night. And there's this silver tray, and there's a glass of milk, and he's going up the stairs. And Alfred Hitchcock pulls the camera back, and the lights go down, and there's a skeletal image of the banister railings on the wall. And we see his shadow getting taller as he climbs the stairs. And the milk seems to glow. Now, the reason the milk seems to glow is because Alfred Hitchcock put a light bulb in the milk. And so perfect, because warm milk, what could be more? Your mother brings it to you when you need, bucking up. So it's a wonderful twist, is to take that and make it glow. And I always think when I write, I am trying to put the light bulb in the milk. Now, it'll be different for you, whatever you're writing. Obviously, if you're writing chick lit or romance or fantasy or historical novel, it's going to be very different. But I try to put a light bulb in the milk. I always have that image in my head of something in the scene that's not quite right, like water running where it shouldn't be, a phone off the hook, a character who reacts in a way that doesn't quite make sense, and so on. So, in my last book, it was a garage door, slightly ajar, with a smell of smoke, and a storage unit with an unusual smell. So, number 4, my 4th piece of advice: be your own cheerleader. One of the things I did when I started writing is I started collecting Chinese fortunes, from fortune cookies that were encouraging. And my favorite one, I had a ladder of them. I don't have them anymore because I had the room painted, and somehow I forgot to take them down, and they bit the dust. Makes me sad. They were fading anyway. But my favorite one was, "You will succeed in a far out profession." Isn't that a wonderful Chinese fortune? And I had it right there on my wall, and so I could read it and buck myself up on days, and because not every day is going to be a good writing day. Some days are good, and some days are not. Number 5, read. So important. You may not be able to read while you're writing, okay? It depends. When I was first writing my books, if I read too much while I was writing, I started to write like whatever I was reading. So for instance, I read my first Robert B. Parker books while I was writing some of the Dr. Peter Zak books, and all of a sudden my characters started talking like Spencer and I forget his sidekick, and my characters are nothing like them. So if you can keep yourself from doing that, good. But it's good to remember what good writing sounds like, and good writers, they make it look easy. So keep reading so you know what really good writers writing looks like. This is also one of the pitfalls, by the way, which is that, we've all been reading. I mean, if you're a writer, you've been a reader, which means you know what good prose looks like, which means when you start writing, you probably know how bad yours is. And everybody's is bad in the beginning. You have to keep working at it and keep raising the bar for yourself. Um, it's just the way it is. We all love reading, and then it can be discouraging to read somebody who's a great writer while you're struggling to put sentences together. So for quite a while, your taste will be so refined that you realize what you're writing is sort of crappy. I have this memory of myself as a 12-year-old sitting at the Remington typewriter that my parents had. It was in the era before even electric typewriters. So you smash those keys down. And I remember typing a paragraph and reading it and realizing how terrible it was and throwing it away. And I never went back to that typewriter. I waited till I was 40 to start. So don't do that. Give yourself a little pat on the back just for doing it, and keep working at it, please. Which brings me to number 6, advice number 6. Hold your nose and write. Okay? Gallop in the direction of more, but don't forget to revise in the direction of better. But absolutely hold your nose and write. Get those words down on the page. It's easier to edit and make something better than it is to write brilliant first draft. I can't do it. It always takes me several passes, multiple passes, to get anything. But if you don't get that first draft down, you're never going to go anywhere. So just please hold your nose and write. Which brings me to advice 7. Slash and burn. In other words, when you've written something, be ruthless about deleting, fixing, changing, but keep an out file. What do I mean by an out file? When I start a manuscript, the first thing I do is I open a file and I call it, my novel.doc. And at the same time, I open a second file that's called my novel out.doc. And every time I write something and delete it, I dump it into the out file. So I delete it from the file and dump it in the out file. And I just can't tell you how freeing that is, because you still have it. You can always dial back. The other thing I do is I save as. So if I'm writing my novel.doc and I decide, maybe on page 50, I don't like the name of the main character and I want to eliminate one of the characters and combine 2 others. So I do a save as to get a snapshot of that version before I keep editing and making the character changes. So I've got an out file. I have multiple versions of my file moving forward. And that way, I'm not afraid to make a mistake. And that is what can paralyze you, is fear of going a wrong way. You need to be fearless. Like I say, slash and burn if you need to. But always leave yourself a way to back up, to go back and regroup. So the corollary of that is, of course, save everything. Save everything. I have everything that I ever wrote in those early essays, and I'm telling you, I have gone back and pilfered from them over and over and over again, over and over and over again. So my next piece of advice: expect rejection. Yes, some writers have an overnight success. They write a great novel on the first try. They get an agent, their books go to auction, they get made into movies. It happens rarely, and we hate them. So when you send out 5 queries, have the next 5 ready to go. Okay, just always, or you should always be in the rotation to send out more and more copies of your manuscript. And I know a lot of people now go to writing conferences. It's a great way to find an agent these days. I recommend that. Just don't get discouraged. Keep going. keep going. And once you've published, stay out of Amazon. Stay out of Goodreads. You don't need to know, your book is finished. You don't need to know why somebody thought you put a bird that doesn't exist on page 35 and what kind of an idiot are you. There are so many mean, demoralizing readers out there who get their jollies by showing how much smarter they are than the writer. And you don't need to read that. Really, you don't. If you have beta readers, people who are reading your manuscript along the way, and you have a good, sounding board, people who you trust, once your book is out there, it's out there. You can read your reviews, you can read your carcass and hopefully you'll get it, Publishers Weekly, but really stay out of the weeds in Goodreads and Amazon. You won't sleep. Advice 10, embrace flawed characters, including your own. So recognize your own strengths and weaknesses. When people tell you some people cannot learn to write, believe them. Some people can't. But what I have observed is no one can tell which ones can and which ones can't. Okay? So I've also observed that it's not for lack of talent that some people fail. It's because they lack the stamina and the patience to finish the first draft, or they can't shut up long enough to hear criticism, or they lack flexibility and endurance, or they lack the resilience to revise, or they're too thin-skinned and fold after the first few rejections. If you can't hear what people are saying, then your work is just going to circle the drain. You need to grow. You need to be able to be open to it. You don't have to do what everyone tells you to do, but you need to listen and understand where it's coming from. In fact, it's often a bad idea to take someone else's advice on how to fix your book. Come up with your own fix, but understand where they're coming from. Advice 11, there's only 12 of them. Don't wait until you sell your book to celebrate. This is so important. Whenever something happens that moves your writing career along, acknowledge it, toast yourself. Champagne is meant to be opened. So when you finish the first 10,000 words, when you get to the end the first time, when you finish a revision, when someone in your writing group laughs in the right place, when you send out a bunch of queries, when you go to a writing conference and pitch your book, when you get asked for a partial, when you get rejected, celebrate. You're moving your career forward. And it's so important to advice number 12, make it the journey that counts. Take pleasure in meeting people along the way, the strengths that you find within yourself, and the pages that you didn't know you had in you. And always remember, this is my final piece of advice, today's crap is tomorrow's compost. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hallie. That was wonderful. Great pieces of advice for all of us. I love especially the sticky note to keep out of the rest of your house.
Yeah, it's a good one to put on the refrigerator too.
Right. Stay away from the ice cream, etc.
So any questions? I'd be happy to.
Yes, please, everyone, if you could use the chat feature, or I don't know if you see a raise hand feature, but let us know and send in any questions. We do have someone who loves the out file.
Depends.
That's
Is
a
your
great
friend.
idea.
Thank you, Nancy. That's a great idea. Love
And-
the out file, Marie says. That's a thank you, Sherry. Sherry, are you out there? I need to go to Sherry.
She says she is. She's out there.
I know. Sherry. Hi, Sherry.
Can you? Oh, wait, here we might have a raised hand. Let's see who it is.
Pardon?
Marie, I see Marie with a raised hand. And Marie, I'm going to see if we can unmute you. I sent you a prompt. This should allow you to
There we go.
unmute.
Hello. My question is specific about the garage sale. When you were there and you went inside and the whole idea comes to you and you run home, very exciting. When you get home, do you just start typing away, or are there index cards and you're plotting? When the inspiration hits, what's step two?
Well, it depends on the book. I do think the first thing I do is I write a letter to myself, an email that says, I went to a yard sale today and here are my random thoughts about what this book might be. But that's just because I'm afraid I'm going to forget. I'm at that age where I spend half my time looking for my glasses and my cell phone, you know. So, but index cards are a great way to sort your ideas in the very beginning. I have different colored ones. Wait a second. Let me see if I can find them. Yeah. I have wonderful different color ones, and I like to use them. Like yellow will be character ideas. Pink will be plot ideas. I might have ideas about setting. I might have idea for what happens in what order. Or I might have character cards. And I don't know that I use them that much, but it helps me calm down, because there's this feeling in the beginning of working on a novel that you're churning, that you have so many ideas at once and you don't know which way to go. And if you just need to get them down so that you can float over them and think clearly. And I do find the index cards helpful. I don't know how much I actually use them when I actually write. It's more the process of doing that that gives me a leg up to writing even a very simple synopsis and a general outline of the book, which I may or may not follow. But all of that is training wheels. That's all getting myself calm enough to start writing. Some books, though, have come differently. And sometimes I would come home from an experience like that and just start writing, especially if what comes to me is the opening scene. If I know right away. So the opening scene for that book is a yard sale. And I did write that very fast early on, getting my characters on the page. And, I set it at the house where the actual house, but I moved it geographically so it wouldn't freak my poor neighbor out. But sometimes I need to write 50 pages and then I can take a step back and do the index cards, because I have the characters at least full blown. It's not the same twice, and there is no way. Everybody just really be the writer you are, be the kind of person you are. If you're a super organized and you like to do storyboards and detailed outlines or synopsis, whatever, do it, as long as it gets you to being able to think about your book. And don't forget the character arc. Just always have that in the back of your head, that who is the main character, what in his past is driving him in the present, and how is that going to get resolved in the book. That's the big picture. Somewhere in your head you have to be thinking about that. Great question.
And we have a few recommendations to read your nonfiction book, Writing and Selling Your Mystery Novel.
Yeah,
Highly
let me see if I
recommended.
have it here. Yep. Writing and Selling Your Mystery Novel, How to Knock 'em Dead with Style. It's I also have a book called what the hell is it called? Writing Your First Novel. It's the something guide, the everything guide to writing your first novel. It's not nearly as good as this book. Okay. I wrote that fast. I was actually revising someone else's book. And this is a much better book, even though it focuses on mystery. It has stuff in it about character and plotting and it's, I think if you're writing speculative fiction, I don't have a clue what you're doing. So don't go with this book. But if you're writing any kind of, commercial fiction, then this is a great book.
And just as we approach the 8 o'clock hour, I wanted to ask, if you could share with us, what is your most recent favorite book? Something recent that just tops the
Oh,
chart.
wait a minute, it's right here. Hold on. Oh, I've read so much recently. I'm actually reading an old Niall Marsh book right now.
Oh,
And she was in like the 30s or the 40s. Did you see that the New York Times had favorite books in the book review section of the Sunday New York Times? There was a whole 2-page spread about favorite mystery novels from the past, classics, and this was one of them. And I'm not sure I understand why this person picked it. Anyway, I loved Susanna Kersley's The Vanished Days. She's a historical novelist. It's all about Scotland in the 1700s and the Darien expedition. It's fascinating stuff. And she's a wonderful writer. And then I read this, which I just loved. I'm sorry. I loved it so much. First of all, I love Louise Penny anyway, even though she breaks every writing rule in the book, every single one she breaks. And I happen to be a Hillary Rodham Clinton fan. I don't know. I love it.
It's a popular one
understand
here.
if there are people who wouldn't read it, but I ran right out and bought it.
I want to thank Hallie and thank our audience for joining us. I do have a handout from Hallie that I will email to everyone just after our meeting.
Let me
But
just
again,
say hi,
go ahead.
Ross. I didn't get to say hello to you. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead. I
No,
wish I
that's all
could
right.
see who was there. Yeah.
And thank you again to our Summit Series author, Hallie Ephron. We appreciate your flexibility and joining us digitally, especially during the storm. I'm glad it didn't really impact much of our internet connections. So thanks for sharing your experience with us. It's so helpful for our writers. And really, I hope everybody will stay safe and stay in touch and join us at the library. So thanks so much, Hallie.
Hi, Jane. Thank you, Rick.
This is
And
so
thank
wonderful.
the
Thanks so
library,
much.
too. Okay.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Good night,
everybody.
everyone.